President Dana White here to announce some more badass fights.
So fellas, it's that time again, combat sports this week, where we essentially just review everything that has gone on in the world of combat sports this week. The fight announcements, the previews, the recaps, MMA, boxing, just pretty much everything significant that has gone on in the world of combat sports this week. We're going to be reviewing in this video, so yeah, let's go straight in there with the announcements. So the main announcements that have gone down this week in combat sports have been surrounding UFC Denver. So obviously the original main event for UFC Denver was Macy Barber versus Nama Nunes. Now apparently, again, nothing has been official yet, but apparently Macy Barber is now going to be out of the fight, and it's going to be switched to Tracy Cortez versus Rose Namajunas. I think Tracy was supposed to be on the card anyway, but that is going to be the new main event. I actually kind of like that main event. It's a pretty good replacement. At least they've not just brought in some random unranked opponent to give to Namajunas to give her a free win. Namajunas versus Cortez, it's a good replacement. I do still think Namajunas is going to piece Cortez up. It's a really tough fight for Tracy Cortez, especially on short notice, but it's a good main event, and I'm pretty glad that that's the replacement. So that's a pretty good replacement for the UFC. But the main talking point surrounding UFC Denver is the apparently the core main event that hasn't, again, not been official, but it's rumored that the core main event for this card is going to be Kevin Holland versus Jared Cannonier. Now, if that goes through, that's a really good fight right there. That's going to be a banger. Kevin Holland versus Jared Cannonier. I mean, if it's never a Kevin Holland fight if it ain't on short notice. So Holland versus Cannonier, that's a big step up for Kevin Holland, though, to go from McCall all the way to Jared Cannonier, who's just been fighting Imavov for, you know, a place in the top 5. That's a really big step up. If Kevin Holland does win, I wonder if he is going to get ranked like highly in the middleweight division, because that is a big step up in competition. But at the same time, for Cannonier, it's a quick turnaround. I mean, the dude has just been finished by Imavov, and I understand it was a really early stoppage, which is probably why he's back this quickly, but he's just fought Imavov, and now he's back at UFC Denver against Kevin Holland. So if they can make that fight, that's a bit of a random fight, but it's a banger, and I ain't complaining. It's a really good fight on short notice, and again, if that falls through, this UFC Denver card is looking like it's going to be a pretty good card. Hopefully they can find Drew Dober an opponent, because obviously Drew Dober is no longer fighting, so if they can find Drew Dober an opponent, that's going to be good, because obviously we're supposed to fight Mike Davis. But yeah, that's everything surrounding UFC Denver. A couple other fight announcements. Bruno Ferreira is now going to be taking on Roman Kopylov at UFC Vegas 96. That is such a good fight, man. Bruno Ferreira is one of my favourite middleweight prospects. This dude hits like a truck, and he's going to be taking on Roman Kopylov. I don't need to introduce you to Roman Kopylov. This dude is one of the best unranked strikers in the middleweight division. It's going to be a banger on the feet. Such a fun fight to see, and maybe the winner gets a ranked opponent, because that is such a fun fight right there. Can almost guarantee it's going to end in a finish. And then we've got Christian Leroy Duncan versus Gregory Rodriguez. Now, I was critical of Christian Leroy Duncan at UFC 304 because he was basically getting fed a free win. But now that he's fighting Gregory Rodriguez, this is such like a much more difficult fight for Christian Leroy Duncan. He's going to get tested. I mean, this just adds to UFC 304. This is going to be another banger. And this UFC 304 card is honestly shaping up to be one of the best pay-per-views this year. It's a really good card. And then the other announcement, Yoel Alvarez versus Elvis Brenner. That is such a good fight. That is fight of the year written all over it. Yoel Alvarez, Elvis Brenner, two guys that come to bring it every single time. That's on the Abu Dhabi card as well. Again, that Abu Dhabi card might just be the best fight night we've had this year. Obviously, we just had Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest competitor, but Yoel Alvarez versus Elvis Brenner is an absolute banger. So those are the major kind of fight announcements we've had this week in MMA. Now, in terms of boxing, we had Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois. That's been official in boxing, and the winner is going to be taking on Tyson Fury versus Usyk. So I'm kind of glad this fight has been announced. It's the fight that we kind of been waiting for, especially after Dubois' last performance. And I'm glad that the heavyweight division in boxing is still moving after Tyson Fury versus Usyk. I assume that rematch is going to be going down in October, but yeah, so some movement in the heavyweight boxing. Back to MMA though, Arman Tsarukyan. Now, it got official early this week that Arman Tsarukyan has been suspended from MMA for 9 months for his altercation at UFC 300. So obviously at UFC 300, during his walkout, he kind of punched a fan. Now, the fan said it's fine. The fan, I'm pretty sure he said as long as he gets tickets to the UFC 303, he isn't going to sue Arman Tsarukyan. But Arman Tsarukyan's now officially been suspended for 9 months, which if that is the case, Makhachev is now left without an opponent later this year. I guess he can fight Gamrot. I don't know. There's not really anyone else in the lightweight division right now, apart from, you know, apart from Arman Tsarukyan, who can't fight. But they also said that they will reduce this suspension down to 6 months if he does like an anti-bullying campaign. They're asking a cage fighter, the guy who punches people in the face for a living, to do an anti-bullying campaign. But listen, at the end of the day, if it reduces this suspension and we still get to see Makhachev versus Tsarukyan towards the end of the year, that's that. So hopefully we do see Tsarukyan versus Makhachev later this year. Then we're going to talk about someone who was kind of just, I mean, we're going to talk about Paige VanZant, and we need to study how much she's fallen off. She went from fighting in the UFC to now being a competitor on Power Slap. Yeah, Paige VanZant is now having a Power Slap debut. I mean, it was only not long ago when she had that influencer boxing match, and she still couldn't even beat the influencer. Now she's going to be fighting in Power Slap, which is an even bigger drop in stock. Yeah, to go from UFC to Power Slap, the fall off of Paige VanZant needs to be studied. I feel like every couple of years, her career just takes a dump. I mean, first it was OnlyFans, then it was influencer boxing where she didn't even win, and now it's this with Power Slap. Yeah, Paige VanZant, the fall off needs to be studied. She's now officially going to be fighting in Power Slap. Then we've got Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, I don't want to talk about this too much because I don't really know exactly what's going on, but apparently there's now been some sort of terror attack in Dagestan, and one of the terrorists was an identified MMA fighter who trained at the Nurmagomedov MMA school gym. So there's a little bit of controversy going on with Khabib Nurmagomedov and something going on with Dagestan. I still don't really know what everything's going on there, so I can't really speak on that too much. Now, before we talk about UFC 303, we'll just preview what just happened at UFC Saudi Arabia. Personally, I think Saudi Arabia is still one of the best fight nights this year. Started off quite slow in the prelims, but Whittaker KOing Ikram Aliskerov, that's a banger of a fight. Sean Strickland did say he doesn't want to fight with Robert Whittaker though, so I'm not sure who's next for Whittaker. Maybe they do Whittaker versus Imavov. Volkov versus Pavlovich. We had Pavlovich pushing Volkov after the fight. I'm excited to see what Volkov does, man. I did a video early this week saying why I think Volkov is one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC, and I stick by that, man. Really good performance against Pavlovich. Sharipus Magomedov fought Tricoli. I mean, he performed, but did he though? Because at the end of the day, Tricoli's a can. Uzdemir KOing Johnny Walker. Probably going to get a fight with Jan Blachowicz. That fight night last week with Whittaker and Ikram Aliskerov, probably one of the best fight nights we've had this year, and I don't think this is going to be the last time we see the UFC go to Saudi Arabia. But now we'll talk about UFC 303, the card up and coming this week. So the first thing we need to talk about is Yuri Prochazka accusing Alex Pereira of black magic or something like that. I still have no idea what's going on. He said it in the press conference as well. Something to do with Alex Pereira using magic to win his fights. I mean, this is just Yuri Prochazka in a nutshell, if you need to know about Yuri Prochazka. This dude is an absolute... He's weird, but I think everyone loves him for that. But yeah, this guy accusing Alex Pereira of winning his fights by magic. I've heard so many different excuses. I've heard injuries. I've heard short notice. I've heard a ton of excuses in the world of MMA, but I've never heard someone accuse someone of magic before, so this is definitely a first. But then we'll talk about the press conference that happened last night. So the UFC 303 press conference went down. It was a pretty bad press conference. The reporters were asking the worst questions. There was one reporter that asked Roman Dolidze what his predictions were for the Euros. There was one that asked Dana White what Dana White's thoughts are on this card. I feel like the reporters need to be... We just need some better reporters in the UFC, man, because these press conferences... they're just boring. There's absolutely nothing in the press conference. The only altercation in the press conference was between Ian Garry and MVP. Ian Garry actually, he tried to bring it to MVP, but then... Even though there was a bit of an altercation between Ian Garry and MVP, after the press conference aired, there was a video of Ian Garry and MVP being pretty cool with each other. Obviously, Ian Garry with his kid. I know they're not going to beef when his kid's there or anything, but does that show that the beef was kind of maybe not staged, but maybe not as serious as we thought it was? Because they looked fine after the press conference. But yeah, nothing really major that happened at the press conference as I expected. But yeah, the card itself with UFC 303, absolute banger. Can't wait for it. Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka rematch. That's going to be such a good fight. Diego Lopez versus Brian Ortega. Big step up for Diego Lopez, but I can't wait for that fight as well. Smith versus Dolidze. Kind of crazy how this fight went from, what was it? Khalil Roundtree versus Jamal Hill to Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze. I'm not going to act like I'm extremely excited for that fight, but maybe it does perform. Mara Bueno Silva versus Macy Chiasson probably shouldn't be that high up on the card. And then obviously Ian Garry versus MVP, one of the more exciting fights on this card. But that is pretty much everything we have to talk about in the world of MMA this week. Nothing crazy has gone down. A couple accusations of magic, a couple fight announcements, a couple announcements in boxing. But yeah, that's everything we're going to talk about in the world of MMA this week. Let me know if I've missed anything out or anything significant that hasn't made the list. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on what we discussed in this video. Thank you for watching.